The Lord be with you.
And with your spirit.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Luke.
Glory to you, Lord.
Tax collectors and sinners were all drawing near to listen to Jesus. But the Pharisees and scribes began to complain, saying, "This man welcomes sinners and eats with them." So to them he addressed this parable. A man had 2 sons, and the younger son said to his father, "Father, give me the share of the estate that should come to me." So the father divided the property between them. After a few days, the younger son collected all his belongings and set off to a distant country where he squandered his inheritance on a life of dissipation. When he had freely spent everything, a severe famine struck that country, and he found himself in dire need. So he hired himself out to one of the local citizens, who sent him to his farm to tend to the swine. And he longed to eat his fill of the pods on which the swine fed, but nobody gave him any. Coming to his senses, he thought, "How many of my father's hired workers have more than enough food to eat, but here am I dying from hunger. I shall get up and go to my father and say to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I no longer deserve to be called your son. Treat me as you would one of your hired workers.'" So he got up and went back to his father, while he was still a long way off. His father caught sight of him and was filled with compassion. He ran to his son, embraced him, and kissed him. His son said to him, "Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I no longer deserve to be called your son." But his father ordered his servants, "Quickly, bring the finest robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Take the fattened calf and slaughter it. Then let us celebrate with a feast. Because this son of mine was dead and has come to life again. He was lost and had been found." Then the celebration began. Now the older son had been out in the field, and on his way back, as he neared the house, he heard the sound of music and dancing. He called one of the servants and asked what this might mean. The servant said to him, "Your brother has returned, and your father has slaughtered the fattened calf because he has him back safe and sound." He became angry, and when he refused to enter the house, his father came out and pleaded with him. He said to his father, "Look, all these years I have slaved for you, and not once did I disobey your orders. Yet you never even gave me a young goat to feast now with my friends. But when your son returns, who swallowed up your property with prostitutes, for him you slaughter the fattened calf?" The father said to him, "My son, you are here, and with me always. Everything I have is yours. But now we must celebrate and rejoice, because your brother was dead and has come to life again. He was lost and has been found." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
A man had 2 sons. Uh-oh. As soon as we hear those words, "a man had 2 sons," consciously or not, there's an uh-oh traveling through our brain. 2 sons. like as in Cain and Abel, like in Ishmael and Isaac, like in Jacob and Esau, like in Israel and Judah, like in Jews and Gentiles, or Jews and Samaritans, 2 sons. Uh-oh. We instantly know as soon as we hear that, on some level there is trouble ahead. One of the troubles for us is that the parable of the prodigal son has taken on a life of its own, separated from the context in which it was told. I think too often today, the story of the prodigal son functions more as a myth than a parable. And I don't mean myth as a falsehood, I mean myth as a story of origins, or a story that explains the way things are. That's what a myth does. It makes us comfortable with the way things are, which is actually the exact opposite of what a parable is supposed to do. A parable is told to disturb us, to call us to conversion. Myths transcend their context. A parable is wedded to its context. What's the context? Luke tells us that right at the beginning, but it kind of goes right by us. Jesus is hanging out with tax collectors and sinners, and the Pharisees and scribes are complaining about it. In response to that complaint, Jesus tells this parable. Forgiveness and reconciliation are at the very heart of our faith. That's how the crucifix became one of the primary symbols of Christianity, because that crucifix symbolizes God's forgiveness and unconditional love. And yet forgiveness is something with which we continue to struggle. I think of the number of negative comments I heard directed at the forgiveness of $10,000 of student loan debt. And I found it rather peculiar coming from people like us whose entire debt has been canceled on the cross. We struggle to forgive. We struggle to forgive others, and we really struggle to forgive ourselves. We dislike even the thought of needing to be forgiven, because that means acknowledging that we've messed up, that at times we've been wrong or self-absorbed or selfish or unfeeling. And so our sympathies in the story of the prodigal son go to the elder brother, who always did everything right. Except, like many of us who do everything right, he's filled with resentment for doing the right thing. He's filled with resentment because he's been acting out of convention, not out of conviction. He's been acting out of obligation, not out of love. His resentment runs so deep that in one sentence he disowns his brother and his father. This son of yours, not my brother, son of yours. And he looks at his father and says, I have slaved for you. He's not a son anymore. He sees himself as a slave to his father. In other words, the elder son, in his resentment, has wandered much farther from home than his younger brother ever dreamed of. And yes, the younger brother is a mess. His actions have been self-centered. His guilt is before him always. But he is now mature enough, because he has failed enough, to know he cannot salvage himself. He needs grace. And he's open to grace. Unlike his brother, who sought salvation and acceptance by keeping the rules, but harboring resentment. In the story of the prodigal son, all of our ideas about karma, about what goes around, comes around, about reaping what you sow, are tossed out. The God that Jesus reveals to us, the God that Jesus embodies, teaches that we can fall from justice, we can fall from faith, we can fall from righteousness, but we can never fall from grace. We can never fall from grace, because God's not letting go. Reconciliation is about table fellowship, where we all come home. We all come home with God, who, like the Father in the parable, is waiting for us to come to our senses and journey home, so that he can joyfully celebrate with us.